want to welcome everyone here this evening. All board members are present, with the exception of Enrique. I will turn this over to Dr. Stallo for purpose and agenda.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming together tonight.
Excuse me, Terry. I forgot to mention that this meeting is being recorded. Sorry. Go ahead.
No worries. Again, good evening, everyone. The purpose of our study sessions are always to share information, to build trust, and to ensure that we have efficient and effective decision-making at the regular board meetings. This evening, Julie is going to begin by sharing the final preliminary budgets. She'll also share with us the results and the recommendation of the audit RFP. We'll move from there into taking a look at the draft of our priority work and district goals that the administrative team has been working on for the last several weeks to share with you. And then we would also like to provide you with a bit of just an overview and an update on some of the work related to COVID-19 that the team's been leading and working on. We'll follow that up with some policy work before going into closed session this evening.
Okay, thank you. Our board agenda monthly review will continue working through our working document regarding budget, policy, and Dr. Stallo's evaluation. And we have a few policies we had to add that are pertinent for this time. Moving on then to Oversight of Operations. Julie?
Good evening, Chair Schimmick and board members, Dr. Stallo. We're going to talk a little bit about the budget and the results and what our budget looks like as a result of the changes that have been made and the adjustments since we started this process back in January. As you know, everything that we do is based on our strategic directions. And so, Martha, I think there you go. Everything that we do is based on those core values and our strategic direction. I do want to talk a little bit about where we're at with enrollment. Right now, we are short a little bit in our budget for our elementary, and that's typical this time of year. So I just want to tell you that it is looking, as of right now, fairly good at our secondary levels. We actually have more students in our budget, which we would want that to happen because we know we lose those students at our secondary level. I don't know. I'm getting feedback. I don't know if everybody else is too.
Melissa, can you unmute your? I think that's the only one besides myself.
So I am just wanting to make sure that everybody really realizes that this is very preliminary. I don't know exactly what will happen as a result of starting school in the fall and what that all looks like. And so it looks really good right now. If it was a normal year, I would say we were on track to meet our goals. This just isn't a normal year. So I just want to clarify that and make sure that everyone knows. I don't know. I think that's my mantra right now is I just don't know what will happen in the fall. I was just like everyone kind of wondering, what will happen this summer and what school looks like and who will want to send their children to school and what that looks like in the fall. So right now, that's just what our enrollment, these are the students registered right now in our district. If you want to move to the next slide, Martha, this is the enrollment budget that was all this is the accumulation of everything that happened the last couple of months. So you can see our increase in our student population by 125 plus 2% on the formula, our increase in special ed revenue, achievement and integration revenue, and then $200,000 because we have additional Farmington students attending through a tuition agreement. So almost $3.9 million in additional revenue for next year. If we move to our expenditures, you'll see that our wages and benefits, we still have a 4-year average costing, our health insurance increasing by 8%. We do believe that we'll continue to need some additional buses for transportation. And again, that may change just depending on what happens this fall. And we do know that we will have an increase in our transportation contract. And then we have made concessions for opening up our new building with additional custodial staffing and those utilities and accounting for utilities and other fixed costs for those building spaces. We will see an increase in our property and liability insurance because of that, but we also know with everything going on with COVID and then now that's a workers' comp, we do expect our workers' comp to significantly increase as well. And then we have our staffing and supply expenditure budgets adjustments that were approved at the last board meeting. So our total increase in expenditures over the current year is $2.6 million. So if you move to the next slide, I did add these capital and long-term facility maintenance expenditures. We haven't really talked about this a lot, but this is part of our ongoing budgets and as part of construction, really. Some of our projects, we don't know exactly which year they'll fall into, and sometimes they'll fall into the summer months. So it's June, July, and August. And so some will be in this fiscal year, some will be in next. So I'm accounting and making sure that we are having sufficient expenditures for our long-term facility maintenance and capital projects as part of our construction. The final pieces of it, as you know, a lot of the Grainwood project is long-term facility maintenance. And so that's an increase in our expenditures of 1.5 million. I just want to clarify and make sure that people understand, though, that these funds are restricted funds. So we can't spend this money on anything but long-term facility maintenance and capital, and we get the dollars to do this. So they're kind of, even though they're part of the general fund, they are restricted to those projects and services only. So if you move to the next slide, and here's what our total overall budget looks like for the general fund. And I really want you to look at under A, the total under A, that's our total unassigned fund balance. So we're projecting an estimated balance at the end of this year of 11,754,000. We are still have more expenditures than we do revenues at this point, but our ending fund balance is about, leaves us right at 10% of our fund balance. I don't know how many of you have heard, but I do believe that we will see some delays in our property tax receiving those funds, as well as with the cash flow. I have not heard what the governor will do with cash flow or the legislature will do for next year if we won't receive our total allocation or if they'll shift it. And so it's really important for us to have that fund balance. So we don't need to borrow money to make our payrolls and pay our expenses. And the total for B is our restricted funds. And these, again, are funds that only can be used for these purposes. So you'll see our student activities are in there again this year, our learning and development, or our ALC and targeted services, staff development, our medical assistance, which is third-party billing, learning and development, gifted and talented, and basic skills. Our basic skills revenue continues to drop a little bit, but I'm going to say that next year we'll probably see that increase because that is based on number of students who qualify for free and reduced lunch. And then we have our achievement integration. You'll see that increase there, our safe schools, long-term facility maintenance, and operating capital. So that bottom portion, those funds can only be used for those purposes that are listed there. So overall, our fund balance is still going down, but we're still in a fairly good position that we're in right now. We'll need to continue to look at our expenditures again next year. And we're tracking our current expenditures as well. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. If we move to the next slide, these talk about all the other funds that we work through. Our food service fund, we're continuing to spend a little bit more money there because we're finishing those kitchens in those buildings, Grainwood, the high school. We're utilizing some of the funds in this, in the food service fund to make sure that we have the right equipment in our kitchens. Community service fund, this is a fund I really do want to talk a little bit about tonight. This is taking our fund balance from last year. We really haven't, what we expect to be from this year, sorry. Our fund balance, what we expect it to be from this year without really making a lot of changes. We're actually looked at, we may come back to you in June with adjustments to that and adjustments to our current budget for food, for our community education fund. As you know, that's the fund that is really based on fees. And so without our kids company, we'll see less fees and less expenditures both. I've taken a really good look at this fund in community service, and I think that we will be okay in this fund without having to move money out of the general fund. I really was surprised at how well we did in not overspending this fund. Um, I think it'll go down about $200,000 from where we're sitting right now, which we anticipate about 917. I think we'll be somewhere around $700,000 in a fund balance. And so I think that fund will end up being in an okay spot to start the next school year. And if you have questions about that, you can ask me at the end if I need some more clarification there. Our building construction fund, that's spending down the rest of that fund. For our construction, I anticipate that'll be done by the end of this next year, by June of 2021. And our debt service fund, that again is in a good spot. Our debt service, custodial internal service funds, that custodial fund is for fundraisers that kind of come into the district and out of the district. That's new again, was new last for the current year actually. And we'll continue that for like pennies for patients and those kinds of things where money comes into the district and then goes right out to another organization. Our internal service fund, that's our increases in our health and dental insurance. You'll see that we'll spend that down a little bit, anticipated to spend that down a little bit. And then our trust fund, we're now utilizing our OPEB fund to pay our retiree health and dental. So that's the $320,000 that's coming out of that fund now. And we were getting a lot more money in interest revenue in that fund. I anticipate if things continue the way they are, that's why that number is so low in the revenue. So that's where we're at with that. Some budget impact due to the executive orders. We've really looked at this again. We do have refunding fees for activities and for parking, and I expect that to be about $165,000. I'm not sure we'll need to do a fund transfer from the general fund to cover community ed, and that would be great if we didn't need to. And I expect that we're going to end this year, as far as expenditures in the general fund, in a good place. I'm more concerned about our revenues as we're tracking students at the end of this year. And so we may come in with a little bit less in revenue in our general fund. So I'm hoping that's a little bit of an offset there. So any questions about this?
Does anyone have any questions for Julie? Stacy?
I just wanted some clarification on, Martha, can you go back to the one page back or 2 pages, the estimated fund balances? One more. Perfect. Okay, you were saying 10% for the number in basically an A at the end of this year, 6/30/2020, right? The 11,700,000. Is that what you're saying is 10%?
I'm saying the 9,828,349.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to okay, so 9 million.
Our estimated expenditures.
That's about 10%.
Right.
So the way we're looking right now, it's about 10% a year from now.
Right.
Okay. All right, and then the custodial account that you talked about for the fundraisers, the pennies for patients, is that like what else is in there? Is LABC like any fundraiser they do? Or, no, that's different. Okay.
And this is new. This current year was a new legislative change at the end of last year, and where we moved everything into the from student activities into the general fund, and we had to make this custodial fund. We had to create that in order for inflow and outflow of funds that they do like pennies for patients. We actually didn't do pennies for patients this year because of this. That usually happens in the spring, and so that didn't happen this year. So we really didn't have any money flowing through that account this year. But if I wanted to leave it out there again for next year in case we did have some fundraising that would run through there.
Okay. And then my final question is just about just the shift, if there's a possible shift. Because I think I was on the board when we were doing this. So right now we're 90-10, right, as far as revenue. So
That's correct.
is there a point as to which, and I should have asked you this before, I know this is not prepped, but, and so you don't have to answer it if you don't know off the top of your head. But is there like a point as to like 80-20, we can be okay without borrowing, but 70-30 would be terrible? Or, I mean, is there something that you kind of have an idea about where we could survive some of that or not at all? Like if there's any type of shift?
I think the last time that they did this, it started with an 80-20, and then it went to 70-30, and then 60-40, but they also shifted our property taxes. So we recognize our May property taxes in next year.
Right.
So, but they forced us to recognize it in the current year, and then we had to shift that. So that was another shift. So it was even more than 60-40.
So it's a double shift kind of, yeah. Okay.
I know that right now I did check to make sure that we would be okay with the property tax shift, which we are, and an 80-20 shift, which we would be. After that, we may be okay. We'd really be tight a couple months, probably to 70-30, and we probably couldn't do all of the 60-40.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to get a sense of, okay. Because yeah, I mean, I think that's a possibility depending on what's happening, obviously. So
I did do some checking into that. I didn't go all the way to 60-40.
Well, that's pretty severe.
Really good at 80-20, and then 70-30, just really depending on how we end this year, could have an effect on that as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mary?
So when you go all the way back up in the slides, you said we're still 30 kids short of budget, which is actually pretty good for this time of year based upon comparative history. I could have sworn that you had said that we had grown 125 kids. Did we budget for the 165 kids or 155 kids or something like that? I mean, how did that?
For the current year?
For the coming year, 2021.
We budgeted for 125.
125
more. And so we're actually 30 kids over our number, but I think we need to be 75 students over our 125 because we'll lose those kids during the year. So we're 30 kids over right now,
Okay.
as it stands, over what I budgeted for next year.
Okay, so we have a little bit of a buffer though as we grow, which is good. Did we fill up open enrollment for kindergarten for the 100 kids?
No.
Did we fill up any one of the, I didn't think we filled up the other grade levels, but I should ask.
I would have to go back and look for sure, Mary. The last time I checked, we did not fill up any grade.
So do you have any feeling if the additional kids are organic or OE? What is it? Mostly OE, I think, or?
Again,
You don't know. Okay.
I'm not off the top of my head. I'd hate to give an answer and I'm not even close. I know that we're not at 100 kids for kindergarten, and so I would guess it's about the same as it's been in the past. Maybe a few more open enrolled kids in kindergarten.
Okay.
And then I would say that maybe our 6th grade and 9th grade would be a little bit higher in open enrollment, but
Okay.
those are the grades that typically have been shut because they haven't been able to get in.
Okay, and then on this, I think it's, I'm not sure what slide, I think it's page 15, you were going through the fund transfer from general fund to community ed fund. I honestly did not follow that at all.
So what that is that with this, the executive orders by the governor, that the districts, if they were allowed to be able to transfer money out of the general fund into the community ed or the food service fund if those funds were spent into the deficit. And I wasn't really sure where we were at until I had a really good chance, had some time to be able to really look at where we were at with those programs. Because of course, once you refund all the fees and you're still paying people that fund, and especially in community ed, I wasn't really sure where we were at. But I don't believe that we will need to do that. But we have the ability to do that, and we're required to do that if community ed or our food service funds were spent into the negative. Our food service fund actually is doing a really good job right now, and so I'm not concerned about that fund. But our community ed, our revenues are really about a little over $5 million, and our expenditures are right in that same range. We're typically, they're closer to that $8 million. So it's a big shift for them to lose that revenue these last 3 months of the year.
Okay. Now I know we've talked about upcoming cuts and that's been hinted at. And you have a 10% fund balance coming through 2021. Understanding that, you know, a delay in property tax payout could cause us to look kind of bizarre for a short period of time until the money actually comes in. But as we project out farther past 2021, are we going to make compensatory adjustments to lower enrollment and et cetera going forward so we can see what our best and worst case scenarios may look like?
Right, I'm going to do a little of that work so that you can see, like, we can look at different assumptions and either revenue and assumptions and expenditure assumptions. You know, if we don't get any revenue from the state, we can see what that looks like for how it affects our revenue. And then what does it look like for expenditures, and what do we need to do on that end? And how do we manage our expenditures? And that's the thing that we've been talking about internally, is really looking at ways to manage our expenses.
Okay. And my last question has to do with, so we're done with the construction, correct? We'll be depleted our referendum fund if you have the construction fund down to 3 million now. So that's depleted on the referendum side, right?
Right.
And a lot of our debt service comes from property taxes and what was put onto the district. Do we have any scenarios that we're looking at in case, let's say, revenues per household actually go down, and we have are we looking at any issues with the debt service fund being able to pay that back? Anything like that? Just, you know, when you look at recession coming forward potentially.
We've not had that issue in the past. I don't anticipate that we will this time either, because when we do get that money, it does go to pay those. And as you may or may not know, that the state, if we can't pay it, the state has a guarantee that they will. Not that we want to go to that place, because if we do, every district in the state of Minnesota would be in the same exact position that we would be in. But we did not have an issue the last time, and I don't anticipate it this time either.
Okay.
We do have to levy, as you know, an extra 5% to over what we actually owe every year. And that 5% is supposed to help us to offset anybody that doesn't pay their taxes.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone else have any other questions for Julie? I don't see anyone. Okay, then we'll move on, Julie, to the RFP.
And I just want to say that I'll be bringing this back to the board for approval in June, at the June board meeting. And again, I may make some changes to the current year community ed, which could affect next year's community ed beginning balances.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. And then I just do want to talk a little bit. We did an RFP for auditing services. We got some great responses. These are 5 excellent firms that are very active in school finance throughout the state. We did send it out to about 9 firms and got these back. Some of the requirements that we have, some of the firms just couldn't meet our requirements, and so they didn't submit. But our fees, as you can see, ranged anywhere from $39.5 to $44,625. And it was difficult to even really look at, so many of them could do everything our district needed us to do for our auditing services. So it really took a really hard look at, um, the experience that they had working in schools, the districts that they worked with, how many districts received the CAFR award that they work with. And we really had to dig deep into some of the experience that they had. And when it came to kind of MMKR stood out a little bit. And CLA, of course, our current auditing firm as always, does an excellent job. But MMKR stood out for, they have 4 partners currently that only work on governmental accounting, and that's unusual. And so that's what they do on a day-to-day basis. They have experienced staff accountants that work with school district audits as well. A lot of times we get the newbies that come into our office and helping with the base part of the audit, and we would have more experienced staff accountings working with MMKR. And again, I talked about they have a greater number of district clients with similar or larger budgets. And so, and they were one of the lowest fees at the $40,500. So that is our recommendation, is to work with MMKR and move to their auditing services for this summer's audit. They are able to meet our deadlines, working in the second week of August and presenting at our September and the final audit at the October board meeting.
Okay. Thank you for going through that process, Julie. Does anyone have any questions? Mary?
Julie, could you share with the board after this the SOW that went out for that? I'm just curious. I'm glad that you did the process. Thank you very much. I was just wondering if you could share the SOW and the requirements that went out in order to come to that price.
Sure.
Thank you.
They just submit, just so that you know, they just submit one price with their.
I get it.
Yep.
I get it. Thank you.
Yep.
Jonathan?
Julie, could you share ballpark how those costs compare to our past few years with CLA? And refresh my memory, is this a 3-year commitment contract? We'll do it again in 3 years? I'm
It's
trying
a
to remember.
1 year right now. And if they successfully complete, I would say that we would stay with this auditing firm for the next several years. We have a 5-year board policy that we would switch, not switch every 5 years, but go out for an RFP every 5 years. So we would look at going out for an RFP in 5 years, but it really depends on the success of this audit and how well that goes. So it's a 1 year at this point.
And do you have a comparison to what we were spending?
Yes. We spent $42,500 on our audit for this year.
Every little bit helps.
Are there any other questions from anyone? Mary?
If no one else has any other questions, I just wanted to know, Julie, do you know how our spend on audit compares to equal-sized districts?
It's very similar. So I checked with a couple other audit districts my size, and they're right in that same range.
Are there any other questions? Okay, again, thank you for going through that process, Julie. And this will take board action in June, is that correct?
Doesn't need board action.
Oh, it doesn't, okay.
No.
Then we should take that off the agenda.
Yeah, wait, I'm sorry, Leah, I have a question on that. Didn't we vote? Don't we vote on who our district auditor is? But I
We-
thought we,
Oh, you'll need to assign your district auditor.
We
We didn't do
yeah.
that in January. You're right. Thank you, Mary.
We will approve, we usually approve that in January.
Yeah,
So
that's
I
what you
would
do.
think we'd need to now. Okay,
right.
because we held off in January on that.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, moving on then to the district priority work. Dr. Stallo.
Excellent. Thank you very much. As you know, our process throughout the year is to provide you updates throughout the year on our district priority work. We've got teams that work on each of those areas. And they give both a mid-year update to the board as well as an end of the year update to the board. And then at this time of the year, over the last couple of weeks, the teams have come forward with recommendations and taking a look at which of the priority work areas or the goal areas from the current year have just become operationalized so that we don't need to continue to call them out as part of our strategic direction work. The work will continue. It just doesn't have a large group team around it. It's more in a monitoring stage. And a couple of those areas in strategic direction one were like AGR. Our assessment, grading, and reporting had been on for the last couple of years. Some of our literacy work that we've been doing, as well as our learning team work. And the recommendation of those teams in consultation with principals was that, we feel that we've got strong systems in place. Obviously, the work doesn't stop. We continue that work, but as I said earlier, it no longer needs to be called out. A couple of the things that you'll see is we have sunset distinguishing between the purple and the green work. We had the purple was really the work that we were just in the beginning stages and had formal plan, do, study, act teams around. The green was more of our core work that we didn't quite feel was operational yet, but it was beyond a beginning stage. We just decided at this point, we feel really comfortable kind of keeping them all in the same area. And we've said anything that is important enough to be on a district goal or district priority work receives the same amount of attention and teamwork around it as we move forward. The other thing that I did add, I wanted to be sure that we continue to take a look at our alignment of our strategic plan with the Reimagine Minnesota work. I know that there's going to be a conference on June 17th, I believe it is, AMSD. It actually the Minneapolis Foundation is putting on, but AMSD is supporting that work for board members and leaders to continue to look at the alignment of the Reimagine Minnesota strategies with strategic plans. So I just wanted to call that out to be sure that you got a chance to see where those 9 strategies are embedded into our work as well. We do the same thing with the world's best workforce, the 5 goal areas. Those really are all embedded into strategic direction number 1 as well. So as we take a look at this, just in review, I wanted to call out on strategic direction number 1, the recommendations of our teams were that we will maintain, we have done so much work around personalized learning over the last couple of years. This was really an area where as we built that instructional excellence framework, we had voices of all of our staff in that as they described what they wanted learning to be. And then the work of Jeff's team has been really what's the professional development and the continued work that needs to happen in order for that to take place. We have been tested during distance learning, and I'm so grateful for the work that we had in place and the learning that we're doing now to really ensure that instructional excellence framework around personalized learning continues to come true. We've been working, we had if you recall, Carrie assisted us with the MTSS audit last year, and we've been working to build a comprehensive plan around that. We had a plan in place. We've just got a more robust plan at this point. We've also will be sure moving forward that MTSS really is both those academic supports as well as the social and emotional learning supports. So later on, when we get into strategic direction number 5, you're going to see that while we've done work to see what had been happening in every school with our social emotional learning work. We're really going to embed that in our MTSS framework more under strategic direction number 1. And then we'll continue also to continue to embed our educational equity and excellence plan. We spoke to that at one of our previous study sessions where multiple voices of our teachers shared the strategies that they've been using with their kids in order to engage students and ensure that we have high levels of engagement in learning as we work to close the gaps. In strategic direction number 2, we'll continue to utilize Forecast 5 as we look at the long range planning. And to Julie's point earlier, really looking at some of those scenarios moving forward to see in a very uncertain time what it is we can continue to plan for. We also decided to add some priority work around some of the work that the human resources team is leading. They've been improving some of the structures and the systems, and especially as you saw through the budget process, some of the staffing work that we've done. But there's more that they're doing in terms of onboarding and hiring. And we wanted to make sure that we called out that work because it does integrate and implement or integrate into all of our departments and our schools. And it touches all 1,250 of our employees. So wanted to call that out as priority work moving forward for this year. Again, you can see where the Reimagine Minnesota strategies fit into that. In strategic direction number 3, as you recall, 2 years ago, we implemented the idea doc, and this year we worked on implementing some of those ideas, but we didn't have a clear goal around that. We talked a lot as a team around if there was a specific goal around innovation, and we decided that rather than have a standalone, we would all continue to commit to embedding innovation into everything else that we do. We certainly know that as we continue to move forward with planning for the summer and next fall, it's going to take continued innovation as the guidance changes and shifts and we figure out how best to serve the needs of our students. Strategic direction number 4, we have a team that's been very committed to continuing to ensure that our environmental education and sustainability efforts are in place. Schools had goals around recycling this year, which really brought some renewed energy to some of that work. So the team will continue to work on that. Strategic direction number 5, I already talked about that social and emotional learning piece. That was such an important part of our community strategic plan process. So that'll continue to be obviously part of strategic direction number 5, but also embedded into the MTSS work. And we also decided this year to add and call out a goal around our work with community or our emergency crisis work. As you know, that was an area a couple of years ago that some of our stakeholder survey was low. And that was when we implemented that following year, the lockdown with options, which moved us into some priority work based on some of our partners looking at tabletop exercise that we did and wanting to be sure that we had better processes in place should there ever be a need for a standard reunification of students with their parents. So we've spent a lot of time and a lot of energy this year working on all of us being trained in incident command and working with our partners to make sure that our training was well designed for all of our staff and really beginning to work on the system that we would use should we need to do a standard reunification. As you know, we were planning on doing a mock incident in June, which we have to postpone, but that will be something that will test our training, and we wanted to be sure to continue to prioritize and do that important work. And then lastly, in strategic direction number 6, we will continue to use our stakeholder surveys. Our leaders, one of the goals that I ask them to complete is aligned to the stakeholder survey results. So they'll all continue to do that. In addition, as we look at strategies for improving our response rate on those surveys, we also wanted to go a little bit deeper and make sure that we were engaging a wide representation of our school district. So we'll be looking at implementing some focus groups in addition to the survey next year as well as part of the goal area. So that is our draft recommendation of district priority work and goals for next year that we are bringing forward this evening, and would be open to any questions that you have, and then would bring this forward in June for approval.
Does anyone have any questions? Melissa?
Thanks, Lee. So your strategic direction, Terry, number 2. The second point talks about recruitment and retention following the Reimagine Minnesota strategy. When I dig into that online for recruitment and detention, it says structure and support robust pathways and strategies to increase staff of color, institute holistic strategy systems for diverse teacher development, recruiting, and hiring, and build systematic strategies for recruiting and retaining staff of color. And then part of that phase 1 is adding questions in hiring interviews for racial consciousness and cultural competency. Walk us through what that would mean for hiring a teacher in Prior Lake Savage.
Well, that's some of the work that, and I actually, Jim, I can sure let you talk about that. But that's, some of the work. One of the reasons that we wanted to be sure that we called it out as some district work is certainly a part of ensuring that our staff looks like our students, and also to make sure that all of our hiring practices are aligned to the values and the strategic plan that we have. So in terms of how that would look like in Prior Lake Savage area schools, I don't know that at this point, and Jim, you're gonna have to help me with this. I think we have always had some questions. I know in the leadership interviews that we have a question about experience that people have had with a diverse population or in closing the achievement gap in some of our demographic groups. So I don't know beyond that what exactly it will look like, Melissa, but that'll be certainly some of the learning that we'll have moving forward. Jim, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I don't. Well, the only thing I would add is I think one of the things that we're going to take a really good look at and have talked with teaching and learning a bit about is just the whole structure from the time we look for someone all the way through until they're being evaluated after they're a staff member, and what that whole process looks like. What characteristics are we looking for? Are we looking for them at every step of the way to have the kind of teacher that we feel will be most successful in our system? And so that's one of the things we're gonna begin to I think pay more attention to, is just that whole process from start to finish. That from the time we post, where we post, what are the characteristics we're looking for? Are we asking the questions in every step of the process until we choose someone? Because we want them to be here and be here a long time and be successful and fit what we do in our school system. And this whole thing is about that. But in regards to the Reimagine Minnesota, it's providing some emphasis around that too, and making sure that we are looking for the best possible teachers that reflect our students and our community. So I think it's a piece of it as we go through the entire process.
Jeff, you had something to add?
Just briefly, I think every district, in the state of Minnesota is always looking for excellent employees. And I know more recently in the last couple of years, we've talked about this, that some positions are very hard to find qualified candidates. Some position, and so we really are looking for ways, again, best candidates, and try to what Terry and what Jim were saying, is to bring staff in that reflect the diversity of our community. I think the other thing we look at too, if you look under strategic direction 1, the work that we've done over the last couple of years with educational equity and excellence, the amount of professional development, collaboration, and partnership that we've done with staff and with stakeholders in order to connect with kids and engage kids. We want to understand where staff that are coming into the district are at with their own professional learning and development, so that, as Jim mentioned, when they come into the district, we know how to support them. we know everyone is coming in with strengths and areas of deficit or areas of development. And that helps us match teachers with mentors. You know, current teachers in Prior Lake Savage Area Schools, we have a strong mentorship program, as well as in the teaching and learning department, connecting with new staff, whether they're year 1 in their career or year 15 in the career, to help them be successful. And I think that's where those two go hand in hand, is around professional development and continuing to invest and continue to invest in teachers and continuing to support them in reflective practice and implementing new strategies that all of our teachers in Prior Lake Savage Area Schools are currently doing.
Thank you. Did you have any more, Melissa, questions?
So just to be clear there, so what I hear from community is that they would want the hiring matrix to be preferred to the best qualified teacher over no matter what their race or their color be. Is that what I'm hearing? Or am I hearing something different based on this information?
We're always, when we're looking at hiring staff, we're certainly not doing discriminatory practices. If that's what you're alluding to, we're always looking for the highest qualified candidate to best work with our students.
Yep.
I'm just hearing mixed messages from the Reimagine Minnesota strategy group though. So that's where I would push back a little bit, because it seems to have a strong preference on recruiting and hiring racial. And
Can
I
you
don't think
tell me, I apologize for interrupting. Can you tell me a little bit about the mixed messages that you may be receiving, or perhaps we just maybe have a conversation afterwards? Because that's not something that I'd like to hear what those messages are.
just when I do research here on the website that they offer.
Oh, so you haven't talked to anyone?
No, but I'm going right by the information that they've been posting for years.
Mm.
It hasn't changed. And that's
Yeah,
what
there's
the
a lot of
community would have
conversation.
problems with.
There's a lot of perspective on the work of Reimagine Minnesota. And I think that's one of the values of the proposed goal that you have in your board packet, is so that we can spend this year really talking about our work and how those strategies align. I know back in March, Dr. Schuttinger and a whole host of teachers spoke to this particular work and spoke directly around the Reimagine Minnesota strategies. And I know that resonated very well with the board that evening about the things that we're doing with students. So we certainly can spend a little bit more time kind of bringing that forward to you as a board, if that's something for future board work sessions or board meetings, about more intentional understanding about the work and the intent of Reimagine Minnesota and how Prior Lake Savage Area Schools is embedding that work or working with those strategies in the goal areas that are listed out. I don't think you can take a website and just automatically interpret that to be something that maybe is or is not aligned with what the district is doing.
This is the strategy as it's lined out. It says recruitment and retention. So it's exactly like we have in our board packet. And I've seen this for a couple of years now. And I think we would have more questions in that area. It doesn't seem to align with what we hear in the community.
Isn't it
That's my
true?
only comment.
Okay. Isn't it true though that we're looking for the best candidates, but we also want them to reflect the population of our students?
Absolutely. And I think the other part of there's multiple parts of all these strategies. I know at a recent Minnesota Association of School Administrators professional development districts were sharing some of their strategies within this goal area of building their own programs and supporting paraprofessionals who might want to go in and get teaching license. So there's multiple portions of this strategy, I think, and to Jim and Jeff's work, we certainly will have goals aligned to this that support and are aligned to Reimagine Minnesota, as well as with what our district and our students need.
Michael?
And I just want to make sure too, for anybody who might be listening to this recording later, that we're really clear that this is also a statewide initiative to drive schools to outline their staff to be more reflective of the people in their community. And I know several of the board members and admin team have been going to the community conversations on race and engaging in those dialogues. And I think it's been the community feedback I get is I want to make sure that I see reflected my family in the leadership positions in the district as well. So I just want to be cautious how we discuss this going forward, that this is not something unique to Prior Lake. This is a statewide effort that not just Minnesota is struggling with retaining and recruiting teachers of color, teachers of different backgrounds. And it takes a real effort, and that's something valid for us to be looking at.
If I can respond back to that, Lee?
Sure.
Number one, again, we want the best teacher. There's a shortage of teachers, so we want to attract the best teachers. But number two, regardless if there may be a statewide initiative, we have local control here in our school district. So I would push back on that. We always have local control first and foremost, depending on what is the appropriate needs for our community.
Mary, did you have a comment?
Not on that. I was going to comment on something else, but to just emphasize that there is the statewide initiative is to close the gap, and it's actually nationwide. Other states have the same objectives, and there has been significant research performed to say that when the teacher population does reflect the distribution or the diversity in the student base, that the gap does close. Now that has been a test case, but still, we have to hire the most qualified people first and foremost. But can I go on to, I have a question about another strategic direction. Is that okay, or should we finish this one?
I see no other comments right now, so go ahead.
We've had these before, like strategic direction number 3 says expand innovation to improve the learner experience. And then the one bullet underneath that said innovation will be integrated. That's a little anemic to me as far as a definition. And I know, Terry, when you went over this, you kind of elaborated on it a little bit, but I'm kind of hoping that as we go into this, that there's a little bit more meat added into how this will occur, and maybe a task to have a actual a deadline for a plan on this one, and the definition of innovation and stuff like that. We've had some of these out here are still pretty broad, but that one's excessively broad to the point where the bullet underneath it really doesn't do anything for the description. So I was hoping that we could get a little bit more meat into that, so we have some milestones and something to actually measure the strategic objective against.
Yeah, we talked about, actually, Mary, we talked about, the multitude of ways that we continue to innovate. And I think where we landed, at least for now, was there just wasn't just one area of focus for us within innovation. Like I said, 2 years ago, we really looked at that idea DAC process. In some cases before, we've had new programs that have started. I think that in the back of our mind also was, we 100% know that depending on what the guidance continues to be to us this summer, we will be innovating, and we will continue to be changing the instruction as we knew it when we saw kids face to face every day. And we chose not to add that as a full goal area. So, I think the other way that we're hoping to look at that this year is to be sure that we continue to call out the multiple innovations that happen rather than just one particular area. But that's something we can certainly come back to, and the board can ask more about for sure.
Are there any other questions or comments on the priority work? Okay, then we'll move on to the COVID-19 update. And that's
All right, I'll go ahead and start, and then I've asked members of the team to also share some examples in their area of responsibility. Speaking of innovation, we have a planning document and template that we're using for all of our end of the year planning. Each school is working on plans to honor kids, to get the tasks of getting their materials delivered back to them, as well as collecting school materials that they may have, doing some of those kinds of things in a very different way than we've ever had to in the past. So everyone's looking at that. They're looking at how to bring closure to our staff and to our students. How do we recognize our students as we have in the past, especially as we look at our kindergartners and our fifth graders and certainly our seniors. We also, our principals have been paying a lot of attention to our elementary principals, especially, really to taking a look at how we are closing the year with staff. All of our elementary schools, the staff will be changing. So they're not going to be able to have some of the closure in person that they wanted. At the same time, they're also paying attention how to transition and to open up, beginning conversations with their new staff. So we've got a lot of the end of the year plans happening right now in all of our buildings. I just wanted to touch base on graduation. Last Wednesday, Dr. Bezick and the high school team did a curbside delivery with all caps and gowns. And I think out of the 640 seniors by the end of Wednesday, there were about 25 caps and gowns that weren't picked up yet. So it was a really successful process that they used, and they learned from that process, and we'll use that next week as they have students. Again, curbside, come in, bring any books that they have, bring their iPads, have an opportunity in their caps and gowns to walk across the stage, to get their diploma, to get their picture taken, and then safely get back in their car and leave. So I'll get some more information to board members when I've got the times for that, because I know some of you, we might want to rotate and maybe have a board member there throughout the day, or each take a couple hours just so we get a chance to congratulate and be with some students as they go through that process. Jeff's going to share more of the teaching and learning summer planning, but I just wanted to touch on and make sure that you were all aware that we did get the okay from MDE that Julie was talking a lot about our community education, our Fund 4, and Kids Company is going to be able to operate this summer to charge fees, which is a very important part of the services that we provide parents and kids in our community. We will have to ensure strict guidance to all of the public health and social distancing and all of that. So it's going to look different. And Kelly's working really closely with Jim and Maureen to make sure from a facilities perspective that we're making sure that we've got plans in place that are safe for all. But really great news that we can get Kids Company back on track, and hopefully some other community ed summer programming as well. We are waiting guidance at this point from the Minnesota State High School League to see what will happen, if anything, with our summer programming and practices and some of those kinds of things. So at this point, as you know, all of our building facilities and grounds are closed to the public until through June 5th, through the end of our school year. And we're just waiting to see if there's guidance that comes to determine when we can open some of those fields, either for our own students or for fees to other groups that are working. So as of now, our facilities are closed through June 5th. And we'll continue to learn and work and see what that looks like. And then the last thing that I wanted to share before I hand it off is we are going to be looking at, we've done two surveys, formal surveys about distance learning, and I've learned each time about how to do better with that. As we continue to learn from our staff and our students and our families, we're also going to do a little deeper dive and do some focus groups in the next couple of weeks, just to make sure that we have really can dig in a little bit to what does it look like next fall with the three scenarios that we are looking at, either being in school, either having distance learning, or some kind of a hybrid model. So those focus groups will help us to continue to plan forward for all three of those scenarios. So with that, I think I'll hand it off to Jeff.
Yeah, I'll. It's a good segue because the last, as you know, there's been a tremendous effort by all staff over the last several weeks, couple months, with distance learning, and so we've been continuing to find ways to support staff, learn from staff, and find new ways and different ways to engage with students and families. The second thing is using that to help us plan from in a transitional sense for summer school in June, July, and August. And of course, guidance is the key word there. The guidance seems to be evolving quite a bit from the standpoint of what we're allowed to do, and that, you know, as of today, but certainly some things may change in the days leading up. And so we're planning a couple of different options. We're looking at 2-week sessions, predominantly distance learning format. But again, the state is considering back and forth of an in-person model as well that districts could look at. What that in-person model could look like is 9 students to 1 adult. But that's not something right now that the state would say we could do prior to August. And so there seems to be a scaffolded approach of offering targeted services or summer school in July to students in first or incoming first and incoming 6th grade, with then in August another session including 7th and 8th grade. And so we've got a lot of time, you know, to kind of plan the program. We have a very good plan for the program. Right now, we're identifying students who may benefit from participating and would qualify in a summer targeted services school format. And then also from there, securing and looking for teachers to meet that need as well. And so again, we've had several meetings on the topic. The ALC is going to be offering summer school and credit recovery as they have in the past. And so that program has not really changed because that's been a balance of distance, I guess, or online or independent study, as well as time in the building. And so I know Mr. Brown has worked a plan with his staff that meets the needs of what the guidance is for ALC students. So we're going to continue to get information from the state. We're going to continue to seek interest in students who would participate in summer school, and then eventually start making some decisions to launch it in July for some sessions, 2 weeks in an online or distance learning format. So that also helps us too with the devices that we provided for distance learning. We're going to allow students to keep the devices over the summer because that will help students if they're participating in the summer school experience. And then the other thing I would just say too is Dr. Stallo referenced fall 2020, just looking at some possible scenarios there. We're at the very beginning of that, looking at how things could evolve over the summer into the next school year. But again, looking at different options or thinking through different possible scenarios that we may need to consider. And then the other thing that's going on is we have elementary staff members who are packing up their classrooms and getting ready for a move to open Hamilton Ridge and have that move during the summer so that they're in their new space by this fall. So, and then the last thing I would say is we've made a lot of ground in the last couple of months on personalized learning. I think the cover's been blown off some of the things that we had forecasted and dreamed at the beginning of the year. And again, it's still a work in progress. We have a lot of people, a lot of staff members working tremendously hard, and a lot of families working tremendously hard as well too. It's not easy work, but we're finding some very positive outcomes and very positive experiences for students and families. And we're finding some things that we have to round out and improve too. So that's not anything that's unforeseeable. So That would be the update I have on the COVID-19 planning.
Great. If I could hop in for a minute, operations. We have a few updates as well. We are working very hard with child nutrition, pumping out a lot of meals along with transportation, delivering meals. It's an incredible amount of work, and they're doing a really good job. Child nutrition is. We're also cleaning our school buildings, pretty deep cleaning now, because we don't know when we get staff back, we could have a week's notice, or students, or anything can happen. So we're working hard to stay ahead. Getting ready to help with Kids Company opening up their programming this summer, along with summer schools and events with staff. A lot of hard work going on with operations.
Terry?
I can jump in. From the HR perspective, a lot of things that we have going on right now are things that normally would go on related to staffing for next year, open enrollment for insurance, a lot of those springtime activities. And then layered on top of that is all the COVID stuff. So you're really doing another set of staffing activities. You took board action last month. Terry just talked about Kids Company most likely reopening. Now that's a whole nother process that we do on top of it, as well as continuing to work with our staff, trying to receive and digest a lot of the resources that get pushed out either by the federal or state government, MDH, MDE, and what does that mean for our people, and then getting those resources out to them or working with them, be it the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, some of those things with leaves. We've had probably 50 or 60 inquiries on some of the additional leave statuses, working with about 30 staff members that qualify for it. So it's a lot of the regular ongoing stuff, Corona layered on top of that, and then thinking about fall as well, and multiple scenarios related to that, as well as planning several plans on what summer could look like, particularly for community ed. So one of the things that I reflected on as I think through this is, I think what's happened is our response time, our more real-time planning and decision-making has been sped up dramatically, where now some of these things that we're doing this spring, we may take in the past 9 months to a year to plan, implement, and do. We're doing it in days now with the planning, the implementing, all of that sort of stuff. And so I think that's a real change for everybody. And when you hear about everybody talking about the amount of work that we're doing, I would concur, because I've never seen the pace of decision-making and large decisions that affect lots of people so fast in my time in education, at least. So a lot of good work, a lot of hard work, and I'm extremely proud of everybody on my side of the office, I guess, as well as everyone else on the amount of work that's happening and the quality of work as well. So that's HR.
Okay. Terry, was there anyone else? Julie?
I would just say, like, it's the same for the business office right now. We're trying to do our normal budget process, but on top of that, determining all the things that are happening with COVID and the effects of that. And, is there something else that we're not thinking about? We're constantly trying to cover all of our bases as far as anything to do with the financial. And as you may or may not know, there'll probably be a special session. So we have some concerns about, is there something going to happen there yet? So we're watching all of those things, and we're doing the best that we can right now to try to cover all of those areas in addition to what we normally do at this time of year.
Okay. Terry, was there any more comments before I ask the board?
Just Christy, I don't know if you had anything. Sorry to put you on the spot. I know you've been assisting with communication all over the place and getting a whole lot out. Maybe nothing else. Sorry.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, we've just been working on making sure we're getting weekly communication out to parents and staff whenever there's an update. So, the biggies are just a lot of the end of the year things happening right now and how we're going to be delivering some of those events in a different way. The next thing that we'll be communicating is really about what's going to be happening for summer. And that'll probably be a phased communication approach because we don't have all the answers right now, but just to let people know that we're working on those things and to let them know that we're going to be staying in touch on what's to come. So that's just kind of a quick and dirty on communications, but that's all I have.
Thanks, Christy. Yeah, Lee, and I think the only other thing that I would just add, and I think everybody said it in some way, shape, or form, I couldn't be more proud of our 1,250 employees. The way that they are collaborating and working together and stepping into roles that they never thought that they would have, and not worrying about their titles and not worrying about their roles, but just figuring out how to support students and families during this very uncertain time. Everybody from our paraprofessionals and teachers to child nutrition service and custodians to DSC staff. It has truly been amazing. And our administrators have been working around the clock, trying to ensure that what you just heard, normal work is happening, but then there's layers and layers and layers on top of that to make sure that we're not missing anything, to make sure that we're coordinating action, to make sure that we're staying within the safety guidelines that are presented. And I could not be more proud of our team. So thank you.
Did anyone have any comments or questions? Mary?
I had two questions. The first one is, as far as preparing for possible activities on the school grounds with students over the summer, I would assume that the cleaning and the preparation at Tom's and Hums is going to be prioritized just because that's where a lot of them occur. But in my opinion and experience, everything from sports training to to the summer school, to the camps, etc. I'm wondering if Jim could give an update on how far advanced the construction and the cleanup is going, particularly at the middle schools, and then other prioritizations as he goes down the path. And that's my first question.
Sure. Thank you, Mary. So we are looking at guidance on cleaning and sanitizing. We're pretty good inside the buildings right now. We're doing a lot of it. Outside, it will be a different challenge for us, and we'll start working on that. As far as construction goes, we are ahead, with the caveat that we're never as far ahead as I would like. But the middle schools will be in good shape. High school's coming along. There's an awful lot of work out there, and we have been blessed with some extra time, and I'm confident we'll be ready.
Are you prioritizing any one of the initiatives going forward as we go into the summer?
That's which initiatives, Mary?
Well, in order to prepare for potential activities on school grounds.
Yeah, we are.
Okay.
Actually, we are looking at everything as a possibility, and that's it's hard for us because we're not getting straight guidance like anybody else is. And as soon as we do get good, solid information, we develop a plan to address that.
Okay.
To bring back our students and staff safely. That's our number one goal: is safety of our users.
Okay. My next question has to do with a lot of times during July and August, and even at the end of the year, we start the transition process for special needs students. So they get used to their next school, their transition, let's say from elementary to middle school or middle school to high school. What type of plans have been put into place to mitigate given the current circumstances?
I can address that. I know many of those transition meetings happened early March, prior to us closing down for COVID-19. So a lot of the transitional components have happened from the standpoint of IEPs or any supportive paperwork, and as far as meeting individuals that students would be working with have already happened. Some of the things that we're not able to do this spring is if they're doing site visits,
Right.
Which I think in the past that's happened, but under the circumstances, that's not something that we're able to do now. It would be our hope, and it would also be our intent that some point in August, if we're able to prepare for in-person or a hybrid component, that there would be a meeting or where students would be able to go and to their new buildings, to meet their new teachers in order to start the school year. Of course, that's our hope for all of the students that we have in the school district right now. But for sure, for students in transition or who need additional assistance, that relationship is going to be very critical to do that. And if it can't happen in person, then we're going to have to think about ways that we can do it virtually with families and kids, and continue to find more and different ways to engage and with families and ease the transition for students going into either a new school or a new grade level with a new teacher that they may have to meet online. So
as a follow-up to that, with the changes in the dean's hours, the elementary dean and the middle school dean, et cetera, how are we going to mitigate or compensate for missing so many days with transition, let's say, into Hamilton Ridge?
Well, there were no changes to the middle school dean positions. Those were just the elementary dean positions that we did not have. We're not going to have the extended contracts in order for the elementaries to align with the secondary. So I'm sure the principals will work on that, and they'll look at what flexibility to prioritize, when before the school year, what days are most important for staff to be there, and just probably allow some flexibility for their schedules to make sure they're there when it's most needed for students and for families.
Are there any other questions, comments? Okay, thank you for the update. Appreciate that. I'll move on to board governance policies. We're reviewing some draft policies this evening. The first two are somewhat time sensitive. These will be first readings. And this is policy 514, student wellness. Jamie Anderson.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Chair Shimmick, board members, and Dr. Stallo. So I'm just providing a little bit of clarification on some of the edits and changes that we have proposed in the student wellness policy. It's required by MDE that we have a triennial assessment and review of our policy. So we formed a wellness committee, performed a assessment on our current policy using the WellSat tool, which is kind of the best practice evaluation tool for wellness policies. As a committee, we discussed some of the assessment results and tried to find ways to make sure that our policy was in accord with the recommendations that we had to follow, specifically with regards to some of the smart snack compliance regulations that have come forth through USDA. So as a committee, we reviewed all the parts of the policy, added in some language, and then made our suggestions to senior leaders and now to the board for the first reading. I believe we're just going to kind of go through, and I'll highlight some of the changes that we have suggested. In the first part, in the definitions, we added in definitions for the USDA Smart Snacks in Schools, the USDA Dietary Guidelines for Americans, and the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act. These are big policies, guidelines, legislature that as Child Nutrition Services, we need to follow. And we felt that it would be important to have these definitions in the policy. So it's just very clear as to why, if we're referring to these policies and legislature, the definitions are very clear for the reader. So we added in those definitions. If you scroll down to the general statement, so in guidelines in E, point 1A, food and beverages, we just added in that we will be following the USDA reimbursable school meal program regulations and the smart snacks in school nutrition standards. So again, just highlighting the smart snack component for that. The next page down to number 3, 3A, We had the curriculum director was still listed as the kind of overall person in charge of adhering to standards and things. So we changed that to director of teaching and learning. In point 3B, we did add some additional language, modify it slightly. This really pertains to the Smart Snack standards. There was an addendum that Martha included in the board packet that talks about some procedural guidance around Smart Snacks. This is just basically for our committee as to how we are implementing the Smart Snacks standards. So really Smart Snacks comes down to food or beverage items that are sold to students during the school day for consumption during the school day. That's what Smart Snacks applies to. So we wanted just to make sure that we clarified that. I know there's been some discussion about, fundraising and classroom celebrations and things like that. And I know that as a district, we are working to create equity among all of those different areas. But we felt it was important to make sure that was just clarified a little bit more with Smart Snacks. The next page, so 4A, physical activity, we just added in that the director of teaching and learning would be responsible for establishing those guidelines and aligning to the state standards. So again, just clarifying that, updating the language there. And the last part is in letter F, number 2B. We actually have all district staff really look at and evaluate the data from the Minnesota Student Survey. It's not just nursing and health services staff, it's more all-encompassing of all district staff. And I think those were all of the major edits or changes that we have suggested for review.
Okay, and again, this is a first reading. We'll be going through numerous readings from here. Does anyone have any questions or need any clarification this evening? Mary?
When I first got on the board, I think I met with Julie Sink. I think it was with Julie, and I asked her about the reimbursable funds for nutrition services for compliance with the USDA standards. And I was under the impression that we had chosen not to change our food nutrition in order to abide by that. Now, I could be wrong with I'm trying to paraphrase, so I could be wrong with that. But so it looks like now we are going to at least be in alignment with the USDA standards for snacks, because it was broken down into vending machine snacks and supplementary food service. But there's also isn't there like a USDA new food standards that were developed overall in 2012 that then the state gives us some money back if we follow them?
Yes.
So help me understand. Okay.
Yep.
So
yep.
I can speak to the first part, Jamie. We are not part of the federal food program only at the high school. The rest of our district is on the program. So this does pertain to our district, and we are trying to follow the rules because K-8 or pre-K-8, we are on the federal program.
So does this only apply now to high school? That's the only major change, Jamie, or how is this working?
No. So the regulations apply to, as Julie said, we're reimbursed for meals through the USDA and MDE pre-K-8. So we need to follow the USDA guidelines. So that encompasses the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act, and then the Smart Snack standards. So those we have to be in compliance with pre-K through 8th grade. At the high school level, since we have opted to be off of the National School Lunch Program, we do not necessarily have to follow any Smart Snack guidelines. We don't have to follow the strict Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act guidelines that have been implemented. But we do still value the health and nutrition for our older students. So we do follow the USDA dietary guidelines at the high school level.
So I just want to clarify then the Smart Snacks update that you're making in here does not it only applies K through 8. It does not apply to high school here?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And this does not change the money we get at all. This is just formalizing the policy to what we've already been doing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? Okay, well, this policy will come back at our next board meeting. Thank you, Jamie.
Lee, one more question. You said this was a timing issue. Is there something, do we have to expedite this?
No, we don't have to expedite it, but our original plan had been to go through all of our board policies first. And I wanted to get this one going because it is somewhat time sensitive. They've been working on it through the Wellness Committee for quite some time. And I believe that it's an annual policy that gets reviewed. I think it's in July anyway. And since it's new, I thought we should present it now so we could get started on it. There's not a deadline where it has to be done by.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Jamie. Now we'll move on to policy 331. This is also somewhat time sensitive and pertinent to the time of year. And Jeff Holmberg is going to present.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Schimmick. This is a policy that 531 memorials for deceased students or staff that has come up recently. There are largely cosmetic changes to a couple of the word orderings here, but in particular, we've had some external groups want to establish scholarship or endowment memorials for our current students. And our policy indicated that we would not accept them if they were in the name of an individual. And so there seemed to be some discrepancy there. And so we have some groups that have established memorials in the names of students and other individuals that are connected to the district, and of course want to award them to students. And so the part that's been drafted is on the second page, page 20, is that, you know, we recognize that families or organizations may wish to establish these scholarships in honor of deceased individuals, and then also to award current students. And that's why it's coming up at this time with graduation. And so what we're asking is that they're able to do that and that they continue to be self-sustaining. They can be established in one time or ongoing. And so that's largely the overview of this. It was just clarifying that name of the individual piece in the policy and taking that out and just providing, I guess, more clarification on what that looks like if there are groups that would like to do a scholarship or endowment memorial.
Does anyone have any questions for Jeff? Stacy?
I just want to clarify, because I do know that there are currently some scholarships, correct? I mean, I wasn't sure if I heard that from you. I know you're saying we want to do it, but we had some before this policy even existed, I think. And
yeah,
on for the years. That's why.
So there's a bit of a history lesson here on this one, is that there were some scholarships that were set up in the name of individuals back in 2008. And then the district kind of went through a period where we had several student suicides as one possible way at the time, which may have impacted some of the verbiage in this policy. I think the other part that I've come to know is there is quite an extensive list of scholarships that are awarded to our students, which is great. And I think at one time at graduation, they were all read off publicly. I believe now the practice is acknowledging the scholarships and then having all students stand up if they've been a recipient. And then there's I guess an overview in the graduation pamphlet. And I think one of the challenges at the time prior to 2008 is in reading those off, sometimes the names of individuals were not pronounced correctly, or it was, and so that caused some different feelings too. So that seems to be the history that I have found on this policy. I'm not making any recommendations to change past practice or current practice on graduation, but also to just clearing up that, you know, allowing these external organizations to honor the students that were really important to them and help our current students with scholarships moving forward.
Yeah, I just want to clarify that there are current, I mean, there's a senior recognition banquet where this is all, they honor these people with these kind of things. And that's in place every, excuse me, May. And that is not being affected here with anything that we're doing. Okay.
Anything that's been grandfather claused in is not affected at all.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, again, this will come back again at our board meeting. The next two policies are board policy. Did somebody say something? The next two policies are board policies regarding the board's role. These are the first readings. The first policy, 201.1, is in regard to school board vacancies. This is a state statute. It's not necessary that we have a policy for this. And the recommendation would be to remove that since it is a statute. However, I'd open it up for anyone that has any comments or discussion on it. Mary?
The statute, first of all, is quite broad, and it leaves it up to school boards to set local control over it, but also it has been interpreted by some school districts, of course, to have special elections, which no school board wants to actually pay for. The policy that we have here is somewhat unique, and yet not unique. And before the pandemic, of course, there was a bill introduced to eliminate the need for special elections and the cost that it incurs upon school districts. However, there are other school districts that have different policies. And one that has been suggested that I sent notes back into when we first tried to do this was in under vacancy caused by an ill or absent member, as well as a board vacancy that occurs that a lot of them, just like city councils, et cetera, across the state and other states, Iowa and Wisconsin have the same standard, that if the council or the board feels that they will be at a less of a quorum because of that, then they can't appoint. But if they feel that they can, that instead of appointing, because it gives the impression to the community that the board is stacking the board in their own benefit, that they actually wait till the next election, regardless of the term of that particular board member. And that is basically the normal process that occurs at a lot of elected levels, that if they can go without, that a temporary appointment either goes into place if they need it, sort of like we experienced with our senators in the state of Minnesota recently, where we had for the first time in a long time 2 senators going up for election at the same time because of a temporary appointment, or they basically just leave it empty and they wait till the next election. And because we have an election every 2 years, my argument in the state legislature was that nobody needs to pay for a special election, nor should they. And since we have 7 members and we rarely see 7 members actually in concert at many of our study sessions, just because of other obligations and conditions and circumstances or whatever, that if we think we're going to go below 5, which would be a quorum, that we basically wait till the next regularly scheduled election, regardless of term. And that way the community has the opportunity to choose the vacancies. And that is kind of what many of them do. They don't just appoint and then let them live out the rest of the term. They actually just leave it empty until the next regularly scheduled election.
Are there any other comments? In the past, it's been very important that we have 7 board members, as that's what our community votes for. And when we do have an open position, it is true that the board appointed them until the next scheduled election, depending on how long it took to be able to fill that position. They did not finish out the entire term. They were only served until the very next election so that we could avoid a special election. The point with this being state statute is that we don't have a whole lot of change that we can make in the policy. So that's why the suggestion was that we would leave it as state statute. Just a little background. Does anyone else have any other comments?
So the recommendation is to pull, is that correct? To pull this out and to not have one, as MSBA has, right?
That's MSBA's recommendation, yes.
Okay. I mean, I think in the past when we've had to deal with this, I think I've only had to deal with this a couple times. It's been exactly as you said, Lee. It depends on the length before the next election as well, in those periods of time. But I think, I think leaving it up to, us basically following whatever the law is stating is fine with me.
Well, interestingly enough, the law doesn't really go into this level of detail. This isn't a replication of the state statute. So, and the MSBA just has made a recommendation just to follow statute by default. And there's a good chance that they're going to take out the requirement ever for a special election based upon the timing, simply because that saves money. So that bill is still in play. I don't know when they could get to it given all the other obligations, but that was something that was recommended. And then there was an amendment made, which I learned about probably around February, something when all the bills started going in, when I was reading them, that said that they, instead of appointing, they basically, if they can, wait till the next special election unless a quorum is not going to be met. Now, this doesn't apply to Congress people. That's up to the governor, and it doesn't apply to senators, but it applies to other elected positions underneath those levels. So that's why I'm not sure if we should wait on this then, if we should just take it out for the time being. But definitely, we do have local control. The state statute is quite nebulous. It is not specific like this.
Can I clarify?
Go ahead.
What I'm basically saying is that we've always handled this at a local level. I think, Melissa, correct me if I'm wrong, you were a 2-year term because we shortened and she came in. Lee, you've been a 2-year term?
3.
Well, yeah, no, you were 2 once too, I thought. Yeah. So, I mean, we fill it out with past practice in the sense that we don't have someone that fills a seat. Or if someone has 3 years left on a term, we don't have them fill the entire 3 years. We put up a special seat. And I don't see us for any reason going that practice, nor wanting to pay for an election, a special election. I don't think anybody wants to do that either. But I think if this comes up, I think whatever the board composition is at that time, we would allow flexibility at that time to do what they felt best. And that's why I think removing it, and then whichever way the winds blow with the actual statute at that time. I mean, because obviously there is a debate about it and they've gone back and forth on some of this stuff. That'll be up to the board at that time to take that into consideration. I just think it gives us more local control, and there's less having to change this because the law changes, or you know what I mean? It's less having to, make changes based on what they're doing up at the state.
Well, I do think we've got a lot of
Melissa?
choice here.
Thanks, Lee. I think that we've had this policy utilized many times over the years. We've had it revised many times over the years. We've invested, I guess you could say, in this policy, and we've had to call upon it a few times. I think that it's worked for us, and I think that we should continue to honor that as, again, another option for our local control. We've utilized it. It's worked well for us. So I would say keep it.
Okay. Stacy?
I just want to clarify, this is a new one in 2016. So there wasn't a policy before this. So when all the changes happened with you and with there wasn't a necessarily policy, I don't believe, with this.
Well, this one says November 14th, 2016.
That was when it was originated.
Right.
And what I'm telling you is we haven't had to use it since then for a vacant.
Well, it was used 5 years ago when I came on.
Stacy, I
No?
think, I believe that we did have,
Used.
there was some kind of policy before this. We don't have the history of the years for it. Because we did follow a policy when we when we appointed some people to finish out a year or finish out a part of a term to get to the next election. So we didn't have to have a special election. So there was some type of policy in place at that time. And unfortunately, we don't have the date on here. And that's something that we talked about, is trying to put the history of the dates of when policies have changed, so that we could refer back to when it did happen. And it is important that we have 7 board members at our meetings, involved, in attendance, and active in the school district. Our community voted for 7, and that is an obligation that we made. So I'm not sure why some people can come and can't come. Things do come up and things like that, but it's not necessarily fair to our community. So I would want to make sure that we tried to fill those positions with people that are able to function in their role. And if they can't, then maybe they shouldn't be there then. There is a commitment, a time commitment. So I wouldn't want to just say, well, if we only can do 6, we can only do 6 for so long. I don't think that's, personally, I don't think that's appropriate. And I don't think that's the expectation the community has, nor the MSBA.
Well, then I think we should, if we're going to keep it to state statute, which is very, again, very open to local board interpretation and standard, then the least we could do is keep the policy, but take out the need for A, the special election, and B, just go to the actual next normal election cycle and keep that in there no matter what. But right now we still talk about special elections in here and all that. I just, and that's been the primary, that's the cost issue right there, is that we shouldn't have to go by if an appointment in section 3.13, if an appointment to a vacant position becomes effective, it shall continue until a special election is held. I think it's just the next regularly scheduled election. That would be the minimum to avoid the cost of the special election. And then what we could also add in is the vacancy occurs by whatever time there is to I think it's the first week of August or whatever it is to file, that it can stay empty until the election occurs, because quite frankly, that takes away, an incumbent on a school board is really hard to even come to grips with. So it also could pit a lot of people against each other. So if it occurs between the time to file and the next election, then maybe we should take it out. But at a minimum, definitely remove the need or any special election requirement, because that would be an extra charge. If it's a normally scheduled election and the term needs to be filled or whatever, then adding somebody else to the ballot is very little cost than a special election.
I believe in the past, and I can check on this for sure, but in the past, depending on the timing of when someone resigned and we needed to fill the position, we were required to do a special election. We didn't have a choice. And I can get clarification on that to make sure that that is or is not still the case. But back years ago, we had to have a special election depending on when they would resign. But I'll check and see what that's all about. I wouldn't be comfortable just randomly taking out special election without finding out if that still exists. But we can check on that.
I think we should find out, A, if it still exists, which I believe it does in state statute, and B, if we can override it with local policy like other boards and other school districts have in order to avoid the cost. So if we can table this and find that out at a minimum, I think that would help us make decisions going forward.
Okay. The direction that I was given is from MSBA. So I can check on that and we'll find out what we can and can't do with it. So if other school boards are able to do it, maybe something's changed because we couldn't do it before. So we'll find out.
Well, and can you get clarification on why they don't have a sample policy?
Sure.
I guess I'm interested in the reasoning behind that.
Right. Yeah, there is no MSBA policy on it. Okay. If that's all on this one, Jonathan?
Just one last add. I think it would be helpful. Each of us can probably find it ourselves, but we're referencing the state statute without looking at it. So I think if we could get a copy of that as well, because if it's as broad as Mary is explaining, maybe there is a good reason for us to maintain a policy.
Lee, another thing is there direction, because the MSBA just sets policy, does the MDE enforce this, or does Steve Simon's office enforce this? Who actually says what a local school district can or can't do? Now, maybe maybe a lot of other school districts aren't doing this, but maybe they're not right either. I don't know. But who actually interprets it for us? Because the MSBA just does policy. So is that the MDE that would enforce it? Would it be Secretary of State?
I can't answer that right now. I don't know who for sure enforces it. When I have a question that involves anything legal, I'm usually talking to Terry Morrow at MSBA, unless it's something beyond that where we need to get our school district lawyer involved. So that's
Okay.
where I go for my questions.
Okay.
So special election, copy of the state statute, and MSBA not having a policy, correct?
Yes, and the next one is what happens if they do pass the change in the bill that was submitted in February to eliminate the need for special elections for city councils and school boards? Do we have to come back and change it all depending on what we do? I mean, how fast?
If we're in violation of what the change is and it affects us, yeah, we will have to change it. I mean,
Okay.
that would be my expectation.
Okay.
Well, and we would have to monitor that ourselves because MSBA doesn't have a policy on that. So we would just have to be aware of that.
Right. Okay. We'll go on to the next policy. This is another one that MSBA does not have a policy for. School board use of electronic communications. They offer direction in phase 3 and phase 4 of the workshops. And we do have a policy on it. And we think we offered any changes at this point if we want to continue this policy. Any comments? Mary?
The electronic communications substitute for deliberations, isn't that covered in the open meeting law?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Isn't the use of electronic communications to the whole process in the general statement of policy A, isn't that covered in the open meeting law?
I am not aware of, I don't have a comparison to the open meeting law in front of me, so I can't answer that. This is dealing more with how we use our electronic communication rather than how we operate a meeting during an open meeting law. So I would have to compare those two, and I don't have that in front of me right now.
I would like to do that just because I'm pretty sure this is already covered. That even if the way you communicate is to chain, even like if I send an email to you and you send it to Jonathan, Jonathan sends it to Stacy, then that violates the open meeting law, even though it was done electronically one at a time, because we were doing it to communicate like in a quorum outside of the actual public deliberation and stuff. So I know that MSBA and all that has a policy on electronic communications, but we may just want to substitute. Oh, well, no, I meant they don't, but I mean, we may just want to substitute if the open meeting law has this in there, and I'm pretty sure it covers this.
I think it's referred to, from what I remember, I think it's referred to. And as I said, MSBA does not have a policy for this. They refer to it and give direction in phase 3 and phase 4 of their workshops. We would have to do a comparison. Stacy?
I think some of this too is for the public's knowledge, because a lot of times they don't necessarily know what what Mary just described, if that's a violation or not. So some of this is to let the public know as well within the policy, what we can and cannot do. It's not so much us, it's to give it more detail for public.
Melissa, did you have something?
Yes, I did. Electronic communications. Technically, is this not electronic communication too? Do we need to add something about this format in our policy? Just throwing it out there.
I'm really hoping this is going to be the norm, which is a topic I'm coming up in shortly.
I think that's a good point, though. I mean, a Zoom doesn't always, Zoom, Google is pretty new. And so.
Right. So I think this kind of qualifies for electronic communication. I think we might have to have something of this, what we're doing here, in there. Or is it someplace else in policy?
Well, I think it just refers to use of electronic, and it puts email, text, etc. Yeah. And we could have digital, whatever, we could put etc. in there.
Good point. Mary?
Actually, the state does define electronic communication and ESI as all forms of electronic communications, including Skype, video, text message, all that. So they actually have a definition behind it, and the open meeting law uses those terms that refers to the master definitions list. It also includes the state privacy, includes mentioning of anyone under the age of 17, for certain things, anyone at age of 13, stuff like that. So they define the data privacy pretty prescriptively, actually. So again, what I'm worried about is if we do this policy, which is great, and I agree with Stacy that we need to at least show the public, the rules and stuff like that, but that when we go on and we put this language in there to avoid potential conflicts with existing definitions and all that kind of stuff, that if we did look up what the OML is and make sure that the definitions that we're using in here either don't conflict, or at least say, hey, this is our standard, but refer to these statutes, at the bottom, that may help. But Melissa's absolutely right on, does it cover this? And yes, it does. In the state definitions, they do.
I guess we need to see that, and then maybe further conversation with MSBA. As I said, these two policies are brought forward for discussion. So, all good discussion and good direction. I'll take them back to MSBA and see what kind of input we get from them. And go from there. Does that sound okay with everyone? Okay, moving on then to our next policy, which is actually a second reading of the school board committees. Again, the only changes that I heard were that we would be changing the title of the Facilities, Finance, and Long Range Planning Committee to Facilities Committee, and adding committees of the whole with Finance and Policy. There was some discussion on adding or subtracting numbers of board members on different committees. And what I remember in that conversation is that we would discuss that in the fall when we are looking at board committee assignments with the new chair or the outgoing chair. Does anyone have any other comments about this policy? This is the second reading. Okay. Let's see here then. Superintendent relations. Terry, did you have anything to add?
I don't.
Okay. Um, informational items. I guess I don't know where else to put this comment that I want to make, so I'm going to put it here. I had a conversation today with Terry Morrow from the MSBA, the lawyer there, and I asked him about being able to have our meetings back in the boardroom and what our restrictions were, how we could go about that process. And so what he told me is it's board's choice. This is a peacetime, I don't know, peacetime situation with the pandemic as well. We can have more than 10 in a room, although it's definitely not advised. We can meet in the boardroom. We do need to social distance. And it would be strongly suggested that we do not have the public at the meeting, that we would continue to have the Google Meet going on so the public could still hear the meetings. And if we stay with 10, our administrators would more than likely have to rotate into the meeting. They could be in the building, but they would need to rotate into the boardroom so that we can stay with 10. And we would need to make sure that the cameras were on all of us in the room while we're social distancing. I don't know the logistics of how that can all work at this point. And I wanted to get a little bit of your opinion on if you're ready to go back to the boardroom to have our meetings. My main purpose in calling Terry Morrow was to find out if we could, and it appears that it's board choice. We could go back anytime we're ready to, but strongly recommends that the community stay with Google Meet. So we would still continue Google Meeting. So I just kind of wanted to hear from the rest of the board to see what their thoughts are. Melissa.
Thanks, Dave. I think this is working well considering what sounds like a lot of hoops to jump through if we try to get back to the boardroom and having minimum folks coming and going, minimum specialists. I think right now this works wonderfully and we don't have to have a minimum number of people presenting and so on. And I would say that at this time, this has been working very well. And I would probably leave it right where it's at.
Okay. Anyone else? Mary?
My concern would be more for the staff coming in and out, and being able to have the presentations, et cetera. If we can figure out a transition to go back to the board meeting without sacrificing anyone's safety or comfort or anything like that, then maybe what we need to do is just have that transition plan. I agree with Melissa on having presenters and Laker Learning and all that kind of stuff, and having people there or having representatives from the schools and the different district offices, et cetera, be there, and then making them feel like they have to be there in order to do the full board meeting. But if we could have a transition plan and have that in place or talk about it as a board, then I would be comfortable slowly moving towards moving back into the board meeting, but not at the sacrifice of people's comfort level.
Okay. Anyone else? Any other comments? Jonathan?
I guess my thought would be, much as I miss all of your smiling faces, I think until we get direction that larger than 10 can be gathered, particularly if we're social distancing as well. And your comment, Lee, that you were told we would all need to be on camera. I kind of agree with Melissa. It sounds like a lot of hoops to be able to logistically make it work. And I think perception, I don't know. I think what could be perception of your meeting and you're not letting people in, even in a time like this, I'd rather not deal with the drama, I guess. If we can continue to meet in this fashion until we have the ability to have more than 10 people in the room, I think would be my choice. But it's a choice. So whatever works for everybody, I will be absolutely fine with.
Any other comments? Stacy?
I guess, I think, given, obviously keeping everyone safe and a safe distance, I think getting us back in the boardroom is an important thing to do. And if we can do it in a safe and safe way where people are comfortable, I think moving that direction, and hopefully it not being a lot of hoops. We kind of did a 10 already. I think we did one in March. We did some distancing there. So I think moving in that direction as soon as we can safely is the way I'd like to go.
Okay. Michael, I hate to call you out, but you're the one who hasn't said anything.
I'm on the fence on this one. I think that we are maybe more productive when we're together. I would be curious what the admin team thinks in terms of their having to go in and out of the meeting, and would love to hear from them a little bit, maybe outside of this meeting. I'm a little bit nervous until we know more about going in person, but I would do it with distancing. I would probably show up and wear a mask, except when I'm speaking. We all have different circumstances. So I would definitely, I miss us having a little more connected debate and discussion. Jonathan raises a good point. Does it give the optics of closing people out of a meeting, whereas now we just got it going so everyone could listen? I'll support either way. I'll be extra cautious if we do go in, and I appreciate that we would adhere to those standards. I don't know if you're thinking already for the next meeting in June or how quickly you were thinking, but I'll support and participate either way.
Okay, I think one thing or a couple of things. One is we can have more than 10. I'm not pushing that idea, but because we're a government-based entity, we can have more than 10 people in the room. It's not necessarily advised we do that, but just for that clarification. And those that aren't in the room would still be on the Google Meet, so you wouldn't be really leaving the meeting. I just want to clarify that. My purpose in bringing this up tonight is to kind of get a sense of where the rest of the board is at, and find out a little background as to what we could or couldn't do, because until I talked to Terry Morrow, I didn't think we could do anything. So I just wanted that clarification. The public still would be on Google Meet to hear us. And if there's board members that chose to stay home and didn't want to be at the meeting, they could be on Google Meet as well. They may not be seen on the Google Meet, but they could be heard. Everyone would have to be able to hear everybody. So just want to clarify that. And obviously I wouldn't want to do anything. I mean, I agree with all of you that, we want to keep everybody safe. I don't want people to feel uncomfortable. These meetings are working. From my perspective, sometimes it's a little bit difficult. I don't feel like our discussion is real good. I think everyone's stating opinions, but we really don't have a lot of interaction and discussion. And I'm anxious to get back to that kind of an environment. So that's kind of why I did a little bit of checking. I guess I just want to give you guys some food for thought. Think about it. If you have other ideas or thoughts about it, you want to, can get back to me on it, that'd be great. I guess I'm really looking for some more normalcy at some point here, and still staying safe, because we don't know how long this is going to be, and we need to live with it for a while. So,
yeah,
Mary.
As far as a takeaway from this, I would like to discuss a transition so we could also test the technology. If we had to stay, and I would agree with this, 6 feet apart or more at the board table, that's pretty hard to get us all on camera. And so I think we're in the reality where a combination of technologies are going to be needed for some time regardless. So if we could transition and test out the various scenarios and I'm not sure who would be in charge of that, just to come back with the options of a transition. I think that would be helpful to making a long-term decision on this, because we can't just go back big bang. And yet, if we're telling students to come back in the fall too, we can't still be doing this and then say that we're doing it for our safety, you know, and all that. So I would like to see some sort of transition plan to occur, and to make sure the technology worked in the various scenarios. I think that's our biggest issue, actually. If some people decide to stay home and still want to be part of it, I believe, Lee, in one of the study sessions in the first year I was on the board, you actually called in and you were on the speaker during it. And another time, Lund.
Mary, I did not do that. I couldn't do that. That's not legal with MSBA. I did not do that.
And Dave Lund also came on during a video conference when he was away, but wanted to speak, I think, at a study session one time.
We were practicing, Mary. At that point, that was during the time that there were questions about if we could, and that was only for practices purposes.
Okay, I didn't know it was practice, because I know that there was, you know, it happened during a study session, but, you know, something like that kind of a combination, if it works, that we could kind of try out, because, you know, we may be in this position again. So do we have the opportunity here to say, okay, we're going to, you know, what our options are going forward, or how do we move forward out of this question?
Well, this is the start. I wanted to find out if the board is like flat out, nope, we're not interested and we won't do it, or if we want to look at some kind of transition. And then I believe the next steps would be to talk to Chelsea and the people in technology to see what we could do, what can work, and move forward from there. So I just wanted to, you know, get a feel for where you guys are all at, and we could move on from that. So what I'm hearing is, let's look at the technology and see what it would look like, and we'll keep moving forward.
So just to be clear, so what you're proposing is to see if we could have some people in person and some people not in person, using all the social distancing guidance for a board meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, ideally, it'd be great to have, you know, everyone in the room, but, you know, we can't. I don't believe the cameras could see everyone in the room. And what I'm told is that whoever's in the room needs to be seen on the camera, and those that are not in the room that are on a Google Meet will not be seen, but need to be heard and need to hear those that are in the room. Stacy?
I just put this out for food for thought if people are going to start thinking of options. You know, I don't think it's mandatory that we meet at the district service center. I mean, we have large spaces in the district. I mean, we could be meeting in the auditorium. I mean, you know, is there things there? I mean, I'm just throwing it out there, because that's somewhere where we could, you know, space out and be on camera, you know. So, I mean, I know we've moved board members or board meetings at times in the district. So, I mean, I guess I would challenge people to be creative.
And I know my understanding is the city of Prior Lake was meeting in their chambers tonight they didn't say how many people, but they said limited, and any overflow was going to be out in their lobby. So I'm not sure what those numbers were. I'm not sure how it worked. You know, that was just what they did. So, okay. That gives me some feedback. Thank you. Let's see. Moving on then. At this time, we're going to adjourn the study session and close the meeting for discussion of superintendent evaluation.